KSYM, you're listening to the Third Coast Music Network. This is Jacob sitting in with you here on the Saturday edition of the show. A selection of tunes from J.P. Harris, and if you haven't really got the hint, we do have J.P. Harris in the studio with us today. J.P., welcome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, that was the latest Long in the Tooth from his new album, J.P. Harris is a Trash Fire, which we'll talk about in a bit. He's in town tonight playing at the Lonesome Rose in from Nashville.
That's right.
But kind of starting way back, you're from Alabama originally, right?
I am. Yep, Montgomery, Alabama, and have sort of ambled all over and lived in a lot of different places before I landed back in Nashville probably about 13 or 14 years ago. So
yeah, that's what I read. You had moved around quite a bit, and kind of one of the things I thought you kind of made. I know a lot of people moved to Nashville, at least at some point, but you made a pretty early career decision as far as a music decision. You left home at 14.
I did, yeah. I had bigger and better things to go see and do with my life, I figured, at 14, arrogantly and sort of foolishly, but it turns out it's all worked out fine. So.
And that was like to the Bay Area, right? For
Yep. Yeah, I lived in Oakland and Berkeley for about a year. Went back to my family at that point had moved, kind of chasing work out to the West Coast, and had ended up in Las Vegas. And I moved back there for a year and played in some punk bands, and then I got sick and tired of that whole catastrophe of a city, and I left in 1999, I guess, and never went back.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't even imagine kind of making that decision at that age. Were you kind of scared, or were you kind of full gung ho into it?
Yeah, I think I've been told that I possess a natural sense of street smarts.
Oh, okay.
I'm not totally sure about that, but I've somehow managed to not get myself into any trouble that I can't somehow get myself out of generally.
Yeah.
My whole life. I mean, I did a lot of nights in jails and stuff through my teenage and early 20s. Managed to, in any of my consequentially illegal activities, I managed to circumvent the law pretty well. Okay. And then eventually survived all that to get smart enough to quit doing stuff like that. So
yeah. Well, my follow-up for that was I was going to ask if you would maybe recommend that to an aspiring young musician to leave home at 14 and just kind of, grab life as a saying.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a slightly different and less hazardous approach to it would work. But I did, I think something that was happening for me, I was actually kind of a star student when I was in elementary school and early in junior high, and as I sort of creatively blossomed and also became pretty pessimistic about the options that were being handed to me in life as a creative kid, as my grades started failing and I liked to skateboard and do hooligan stuff, all the creative instructors, teachers, mentors around me were desperately trying to vie on my behalf to keep me in these programs, and I was getting booted out of all these creative things in school because of the grade point average, and I realized that the opportunity for me to actually go out and express myself creatively and flourish that way was just not presented. I think that's a symptom of the American education system for sure. And so I just kind of went out and made my own education and went out and learned in the world. And I do hope that as time progresses and people's attitudes towards education shift in our country, that maybe one day people can look past the ones and zeros of the student metric, and really recognize talent and creative potential, and give kids who maybe aren't gonna get an A in math, but can be the next filmmaker, or the next songwriter, or the next actor, or whatever. Give them those opportunities despite them not succeeding within the conventions of education, So
yeah.
So maybe stay at home, kids, but just tell your parents that the normal model of education doesn't work for you.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah, that's quite the decision. And then you kind of mentioned shortly after that a lot of hitchhiking, train hopping.
Yep. I went full in to the early 20th century American bohemian experience, I guess you could say.
And did kind of the music kind of fall in line to country from punk in that travel?
It did, yeah. And I could go on and on. I actually did an interview recently with someone who's writing a whole long-form article about the, now it's happened long enough that you can see the natural progression between. There's a lot of Americana artists and country artists who came out of the world of punk rock and, kind of alt rock and the sort of the themes and the day-to-day life of it made a lot of sense, in addition to the fact that I didn't have electricity for 15 years of my life, and so I couldn't play electric guitars anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, I started the same ethos of the punk rock world that I was a part of. Was very like DIY, you know, we were making our own zines and throwing our own shows in the desert and, you know, living in weird quasi-communal punk houses and all this stuff. And what that sort of parlayed into for me was the idea of doing more for myself, like actualizing this idea of the do-it-yourself community and lifestyle. And so I took that into learning a lot of trade skills and a lot of real kind of primitive folk skills in general. And then naturally, the soundtrack that backed those up became early American music. And, you know, I had grown up listening to Southern rock and roll music and some folk that my mom had, you know, where we had a huge record collection all growing up. But it wasn't until I was sort of living it that all of a sudden something clicked in my mind listening to Jimmy Rogers and the Carter Family and, you know, Hank Williams and that sort of stuff. And then I just never shook the habit.
Yeah. Well, like you're saying, hard to do punk music without electricity.
Yeah, it's folk punk sucks. I'll tell you that. There's a lot of people have tried, and it's not good.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, you mentioned some of the trades you picked up. I was reading kind of the list of some of these, and I was watching. There's a great documentary about that ties in with this record, and you mentioned logger. Was that the hardest kind of occupation that you had, or was there something harder
for
than that?
sure? Yeah, for all of you out there who can't see my beautiful face for radio, I am not a very large dude, and so lugging a giant chainsaw and heavy chains and skitter cables all day through the winter wonderland of the North, that was some pretty tough work. But it was a sort of a circumstantial thing. You know, I've always been very attuned to and connected to the mountains and the forest, and you know, it became a necessity when I moved up north, because I lived in Vermont for about 11 years before I moved back to the South. And it just became sort of a necessity that I learned to cut firewood, because, you know, 95% of everybody's heat up in the North Woods is wood. And then that sort of turned into, you know, an interest in forest management and running heavy equipment. I kind of taught myself how to run heavy equipment, and then sometimes in the winter, I was concurrently diving real hard into historic restoration carpentry, you know, which is still my main trade outside of music. But sometimes the winter is just too damn cold to hold anything with precision and, you know, hammer a nail into a building. I mean, tools freeze, you know, all this kind of crazy stuff. And so it became sort of a yearly cycle that, you know, as the winter got colder and the frost got deeper in the ground, it's like, well, it's logging season, so I'm putting the tool belt down and putting the chaps on, and here we go.
Wow.
So, and it was hard work. You know, I got to do some really awesome jobs. Still really tight friends with one of the dudes I partnered with a lot every winter. We'd, you know, lease ourselves a skidder, and I had a bulldozer we'd bring out and sort of scrap our way through the woods all winter. But it was exciting work, and it was nice to just hoof it out in the woods all day every day. But I'm glad I'm not still doing that as a winter profession. It's hard on you, and I took a couple of pretty good injuries doing that work, and I think I think by OSHA standards, it's still maybe like the second most dangerous trade in America, next to open water fishing. I think commercial fishing is the logging industry. So I had some near misses with that, and
that's what I was going to ask. I still have some close calls. There, I'm sure.
I still got, you know, half a dozen chainsaws and all my professional gear in the shed. But the last time they came out was to clean up after the tornado in Nashville a handful of years ago. So it's relegated to you know, a hobby and a less occupational thing for me now. So.
Well, we're glad you're here, and we're glad you have all your fingers.
Yep. Somehow. I worked with a lot of spinning blades in my life.
Yeah, for sure.
Magically, there's still 10 of them. So.
Yeah, and I'll mention to our listeners, we have guitars in the studio, so I think it's about time to maybe cut a song. You guys got one in mind?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, we can play a little sad one from the new record. This is a tune that I recorded with my dear friend Erin Ray, who is one of my favorite singers and sweet woman, very good friend of mine, and also my friend Sean Thompson's here, who's playing in the band with me on tour, and Sean also plays with Erin. But we recorded this one, and it's probably my favorite cut from the new record. It's called To the Doves. I could be the only one cleared the sky and lit the sun, pulled you from the darkness to the daylight. Could have been your sole reprieve, the everything you'd ever need, the one the good Lord made to be by your side. But I was just a stranger, you're better off this way, why bear the pain for losing one you love? So go on, forget I ever came, forget you knew my name, and let's leave the morning to the doves. Honeysuckle's sweetest scents tangle around the barbed wire fence, torment and the beauty, hell, they linger. You painted me a thornless rose of only colors that you chose, and cried when the blood ran from your fingers. It's no use, dear, to fight it. Open up your eyes, I'm just a dream that you've been dreaming of. So go on, forget I ever came, forget you knew my name, and let's leave the morning to the doves. A fairy tale and flowers, just time and simple hours that we spent among the stars above. But my heavens, they have come and gone. Take your heart and carry on, and let's leave the morning to the doves.
KSYM, you're listening to the Third Coast Music Network. JP Harris live in the studio doing To the Doves from his new album, JP Harris is a Trash Fire. That's a great one. I was reading a review when they compared it to, like, you know, kind of prime Chris Christopherson.
Yeah, that's been some very universal and flattering feedback. I only met Chris once before he passed away, but I had a solid 10 minutes. It felt like a lifetime that I got to hang out with him, and he was a surprise guest artist up at the Newport Folk Festival one year I was there, and he was incredibly sharp still and such a sweetheart, and you know, I could never in my wildest dreams imagine to write anything as strong or long-lasting and timeless as Christopherson. But there's been 5 or 6 people that I respect as music writers who've compared that to a Christopherson tune, and it is very flattering. It's a really, you know, a song that's pretty different than anything I've ever written before, and kind of, I'm not really a practiced songwriter. I have no, you know, I have no formal musical training of any sort, and for a guy who lives in Nashville, you know, people think like, oh, you must go over to Music Row and sit around with guys with sparkle jeans and bleach tips writing hits all day, right? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And I can't even make a framework to, you know, a regimen of songwriting. It's not like, okay, Saturdays from noon to 4, I'm going to songwrite. It's usually I'm about to go to bed and I smoked a doober and I'm like, wait a minute, I got an idea. And I go sit naked on the couch in the dark and write a song. And that one kind of just came out of the ether to me once about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And finally got to record it on this record. So it's a fun tune.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and you mentioned, well, we talked about a little bit about your background doing all the trades and stuff like that. I was reading here in your bio here, you didn't really feel comfortable labeling yourself as a professional musician for a while. Did that kind of culminate with your move to Nashville, or what was the moment that you decided to, I'm a professional musician?
I think even when I moved to Nashville, it was, you know, there was other reasons too. My grandmother was getting older, and she and I were really close, and she still lived in the town that my family's from in East Alabama, DeVille, and she was getting older and her health was declining, and I wanted to move to be closer to her. And, you know, I think my tenure in Vermont had come to a close. I realized that I had this whole trajectory in life where I thought I was going to be like a homesteader with a horse logging operation and a farm and blah. That was where I was going. And then I don't know how I think through old time Appalachian music, really, I got into playing clawhammer banjo when I was probably 19 or 20. And then after a handful of years of that, I just realized that music was going to be a really important part of my life, but I never made a conscious choice to consider it a professional pursuit. I put bands together and went on tour, but in my mind, it was just it was sort of like working vacation. I was like, this is awesome. I get to play on stage and see all my friends and travel all over like I used to. And it was more an excuse to have a reason to be ambling around and, going to different places and cities and towns. And it was years. I mean, even the first year I moved to Nashville, I ended up getting a really amazing accolade from our local free weekly paper, that they tied my album with a Chuck Mead record for Best Country Record of 2012, which I thought was pretty mind-boggling to me. And it was some number of years. I mean, even still nowadays, sometimes I kind of look around, even with these fellows I get on stage with, and I'm like, well, these guys are real musicians, but I am an incredibly good con artist who's got a way with words, and I've somehow managed to get on the stage in the limelight in the front with the microphone to do this. So, even today, I kind of, I think because I've never fully relied on music as my only source of income and my only occupation, the motivation for me still lies in the pure joy of writing music and recording it and then getting out on the road and getting on stage. I mean, I just live to get on the stage and sing songs and watch people smile and dance. I mean, it's a communal experience. That's part of the reason why I rarely play solo at all. Is I like playing music with people, and I like the experience and the shared joy of the crowd interacting with me. And so I still think I'm just kind of like a carpenter with a country music habit that I can't kick, but I have done some amazing things solely through my music career that if you'd gone back in time and told 14-year-old me as I climbed out my bedroom window one night to never go back, like, hey man, you know what you're going to do? You're going to play on a stage in Spain in the same zone where they filmed The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly to 3,000 screaming Spaniards on like a 90-foot long stage with a pair of Fender Twins behind you as the full moon rises behind your face on a Jumbotron. I'd be like, there is no possible way that's happening. And that is one of thousands of stories I've accrued from this wild life of being a musician. And so, I think that's the passion in it for me, is living life to its fullest and creating a limitless amount of new stories I can keep telling people when I get old. Yeah,
and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but you still do historic restoration carpentry. That's still a passion of yours.
I do, yeah.
Is that just in the Nashville area? I think you mentioned that, Doc, you built something somewhere else, but have you ever combined tour routing with a carpentry project?
Sort of. I was actually telling a story as we were pulling in here about, I was like, man, when was the last time I was in San Antone? And I remembered that I have been working, I'll go out and do jobs, sort of out in other places, mostly just for friends. But I was working on a job one winter with a buddy of mine over in St. Francisville, Louisiana. It's in West Feliciana Parish.
Okay.
It's the same parish where Angola Federal Penitentiary is. And me and my buddy were living in these like nasty old FEMA trailers, surplus trailers, and working on this guy's camp. All Cajuns have a camp.
Yeah.
And so we're working on this sort of well-to-do Cajun man's camp all winter in the middle of nowhere. And I had a couple of dance hall gigs in Texas, in Austin. And so me and my buddy drove over here to, I used to pick up band. We play these, just all-night dance hall kind of gigs. And then a couple of rowdy fiddle girls that we know from Austin, Beth Chrisman, Heather A. Johnson, and there's a whole gang of them. We're like, we're going to go see Randy Travis down in San Antonio tomorrow night. Y'all want to come? We're like, hell yeah, we're going to San Antonio. So that's the closest combination I've had was, but I've done jobs where, I've gone to really remote places. I've built quite a few recording studios or remodeled them for friends of mine over the years, which is it's very fun to have. That's probably the closest combination of the two, is that I've, the studio where we made the new record in Nashville, the Bomb Shelter. It's our friend Andrea Turkich's studio. And there's been, Alabama Shakes records and Hooray for the Riff Raff and the Deslons, and everybody you can name has made records. Awesome studio.
Great studio.
Kind of janky in a cool way. Andrea's a scrappy old punk kid like me, and I've done, I don't know how many phases of work on that thing, and actually built the drum room that's on the front of it now. And so it was really fun to go back in there 5 or 6 years later and sit in that drum room to do my vocals and guitar for this record. And I was like, I built this thing, man. This is awesome. So so it's a practical skill that I, occasionally find a way to dovetail with my music
That's
world
great.
too.
Yeah, and obviously building the studio you're recording at's pretty neat. But are there any other kind of projects, like restoration projects, that stand out to you as like pretty awesome?
Yeah, I've done some. I mean, I did when I lived up north. I worked on some mid 18th century buildings. Did some really amazing restoration work on a couple of houses from 1740s. And in Nashville, I've actually we did a job for a couple of years right near 5 Points on the east side, sort of the epicenter of the whole the east side vibe. Bars and restaurants and all that. And there's a man named Hugh Cathcart Thompson, who is an architect that was the one who designed and built the Ryman Auditorium, the Mother Church of Country Music. And he wanted to live away from downtown and up high enough somewhere that he could watch the construction of the Ryman from afar. And he literally built himself this house right at the corner of 12th and Holly Street, right about a block out of 5 Points. And put a little widow's walk on the top with a telescope, and he could watch the progress on the Ryman. Because back then it would, it was a couple-hour walk to get to downtown. And then he further went to design and build the houses on all the adjacent corners. And so not the house he lived in while he built the Ryman, but the one he built concurrently as the Ryman was being constructed. Me and my crew got to fully restore the exterior, these, copper line Queen Anne gutters, and we deconstructed the whole original front porch and reconstructed all the replicated components, and it was for a really, really cool older couple who had retired from big tech and were huge music fans. And so there was a fun, I'd be working on their house all week, but then I'd go to a show on the weekend, and all of a sudden these two rad folks in their late 70s would come popping out, and be like, hey man, we're here. And that was a really incredible job because I got to the correlation to the Ryman Auditorium, the history of country music there, and knowing that, going so many layers deep into restoring a house that the man who designed and built was that felt like all of my worlds kind of colliding, and felt like I had done something truly important to the historic continuum of that neighborhood, and no one's going to know I worked on it in the next 50 years. Someone might tear the ceiling of the porch down and see where I graffitied my name huge with a date on the ceiling, But to me, it's very satisfying to walk away knowing that I played my part, and it felt like despite it being a private property, it felt almost more like a community service to do. And that sort of stuff's always fun. So that was a big one for me.
Cool. Yeah, that's really neat, kind of. Like you're saying, be a part of that history and doing that stuff. Yeah, well, I'll talk a little bit about your new record, J.P. Harris is a Trash Fire, which is when we got that CD and I saw the title, I was like, well, this is an eye catcher here, and produced by J.D. McPherson, who I like a lot of the stuff he produces. He's great. How did that come about, working with him?
Well, he and I have been buddies for quite a few years, and strangely enough, got to be friends through him hiring me to come work on his house.
Oh, wow.
He still lived in Nashville. He moved back to Tulsa with his family maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, he wanted to have like ostensibly just a deck built on his house, but he wanted to have an artistic element to it, and he holds several art and film degrees also. He was a teacher in Tulsa before his music career kicked off as it has. And he didn't want to hire just a run-of-the-mill contractor, and so he started asking around, and he said that, after like the third or fourth person was like, well, J.P. Harris is like a killer carpenter. You should hire that guy. And so I went over just, again, ostensibly just to build him a deck. And then by the third or fourth night, he started coming out with a pair of rocks glasses with palomas in them. And he's like, you want to drink? You want to hang out, man? And then we would just, it ended up, instead of going home at 5 every day from his house, I was usually there till about 8:30 or 9. And all of a sudden, he'd be like, well, I made this brisket, or I'm cooking this fancy, weird ethnic meal, And so we became fast friends, and I actually called him one day back in probably early 21 or something. Me and him and his family were all kind of a little pod during COVID, so we could, have some social life and hang out, and had a lot of fun. His daughters have sort of grown up around me, and his wife Mandy is a good friend of mine too, and they're just amazing, lovely people. And I called him to reference another producer he had worked with on one of his records. And someone had said, hey, you should work with this guy. And JD made a record with him. You should call him. And about a minute into the conversation, he said, hey, man, I don't want to like wait this conversation. And if the answer is no, totally cool. And I'm not trying to steal anyone else's work, but could I produce a record for you? And I was flabbergasted because, he had been a musical hero to me long before we met and became friends. Yeah. And still is, his new album that he just released, I think about a week after my record came out, is just phenomenal. And he continues to do a similar approach of mine to try and expand, his tonal palette without leaving the sphere of what he's created as JD McPherson.
Yeah.
Similar. I've tried to do that with my country music. And so it was really flattering that he wanted to produce a record for me. And, we kept talking about it, and I was just giddy beside myself. And then about a month later, he called me randomly, and I was like, why is JD calling me at 4 p.m? And he said, dude, I just got a call from Allison Krauss to come sit in on this taping session they're doing. I was like, whoa, damn, that's hot news, man. Cool. And he went and did that, and then about a week later, he was telling me about it, and he left my house to go pick one of his daughters up from high school, and he called me, and I was like, why is JD? He was just at my house 45 minutes ago. And he called me and he said, you're not going to believe this, but I was driving home with Ainsley from school pickup, and I got a call from Allison, and she said that her and Robert Plant would like for me to play in their road band. And that was just unreal.
I've seen some pictures of, he's on his Instagram where he's like, a huge crowd, and it's Robert Plant and Allison Krauss.
Incredible. So incredible. And the stories that he's accrued through that whole traveling. The band is amazing too. It's Stuart Duncan and Jay Bellarose and Dennis Cratch. I mean, just crazy. The best of the best. And that ended up obviously eating up a ton of his time.
Yeah, for sure.
And then every time he was off the road, he'd hit me up and say like, hey man, what are you doing next month? And I was like, damn it, I've got 2 flyout gigs or whatever, and we just we went round and round for probably a year and a half or something before we finally found ourselves a window to do it in February of 23. Yeah, February 23. He had like 2 weeks off, and his wife decided to give him plenty of leeway to come back to Nashville for a week with me, and then we spent a couple more sessions over the rest of that year, picking away at vocals and mixing and all that kind of stuff. But phenomenal to work with. Absolutely phenomenal. Yeah,
and I was going to ask, I know the first record he did, that Signs and Signifiers, that was on tape. Did you guys record it on tape? Or?
Yep, everything was tape. Andrea's got an insane array of outboard gear, and there's a lot of really cool, funky old analog stuff or early digital analog hybrid equipment. And there's a sound. I truly believe that Andrea, and again, the funny part is, you kind of go in the studio, and I think if you were a 23-year-old, starry-eyed Americana artist, and you'd seen that all these incredible records have been made at this place called the Bomb Shelter, and you'd show up, and it's this horrid shade of like mauve-y pink, and there's this dumpy old house behind a gas station. And then you go inside and it's kind of the same, it's like just kind of janky and bubble gum and duct tape together, and I don't know if anyone else could turnkey just go in there and operate that room, the A studio there, like Andrea does. He's just sort of rigged and wired everything together just so, and I do truly believe that especially for a guy who has a zero ego about it and no cult of personality attached to his skill, but he gets sounds out of that specific studio with those specific pieces of equipment that other people aren't getting anywhere in America these days, and it's just cool. It's like something about everything being a little bit broken kind of is what makes it work right, So. Man,
it's I'll mention again, a great record. Sounds really cool. I'm going to read this bit here. It says, only albums by Lee Hazelwood and an obscure folk album Waylon Jennings made when his hair was still short were allowed to be mentioned in reference. So, there's some cool stuff. I mean, a song that comes to mind, Dark Thoughts, that's such a cool, great sounding song and stuff like that. But, kind of mentioning those dudes, Lee Hazelwood and Waylon, but there's a DEVO cut.
Yep, there
on
is.
This record.
Yep, absolutely.
So you guys strayed a little bit from that era, and
we did.
went a little new wave,
it's
so to
funny
speak.
because I usually go into the studio with a couple of, throwaways. Sometimes they've rolled over to the next album I made, or sometimes I just shelf them and say like, that was a good song, but it didn't make the record, and that's that. It'll stay in a notebook forever.
Yeah.
But I randomly brought it up to JD about 4 days before we were going to the studio. I was like, hey, man, this is just total curveball here, but I've always thought it would be awesome to record like a badass country version of this DEVO tune. And before I'd even finished the sentence, he just put his hand on my shoulder and he was like, we're doing that. That's happening.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It's sort of, I feel like it was the cherry on top, like the little bow we put on the whole album to, plant the flag in the mud that we can do things that sound traditional, but that are original, and we can continue to expand the weirdness of that. I don't ever want people to think that I'm sort of like, I'm just a beer drinking country boy. It's like, yes, I am a beer drinking country boy, but I'm a weirdo art guy too, and I don't ever want to just be pigeonholed in with all this sort of run of the mill normal ass country music. I would like to stay far to the left of center in my lane and hang out with the weirdos and the hippies and the acid heads. So the DEVO cover kind of sealed the deal on that one.
That was great. When I heard that, I was like, again, because we just got a physical CD, thanks JP, but when I saw it in the system, it's just a beautiful world. It's like, I wonder if that's the DEVO song. And it turned out to be, so that was a pleasant surprise to hear that when I played that.
Oh, that's cool.
Was going to ask you about the title track. First, it's kind of, obviously pretty cool. You can refer to yourself as a trash fire, but you kind of, going back to your living remote in a cabin and stuff like that, and I know this was like a, kind of a lament of today's age and counting streams and cell phone movies. Do you kind of still, obviously you probably have electricity now, but do you kind of stay off the grid as far as like in the digital things people are doing, like socials, and are you pretty detached from that?
I interact with some of that stuff a little bit. I think Instagram is the only one I ever really learned how to use some years ago, and I resisted having any of that stuff for ages. But I try to stay as unengaged as possible, and there's this sort of like hyper normalization of this rat race related to what is in essence a craps game of success related to art and music with social media algorithms. And I'll put some things on the internet here and there, but I've just decided I'm not gonna play that game. It's not worth it to me. And even as weird as this sounds, because I'd rather just only be complimented on my music, but I've had fans compliment me on my social media presence because there's not a lot of it, and I don't waste their time. And I'm not bludgeoning them over and over with a new cover song reel of the day to try and spike the algorithm and get likes and follows and blah blah blah. And I know that it is part of the new digital hellscape of trying to just be a good songwriter, but I'm just not willing to fully engage in it. And and there's a lot of aspects of that. That song is not just the internet and social media. It's sort of watching. When I started touring and putting writing my own music 15, 16, 17 years ago, there was only a handful of people that were. You could come see kick-ass bands in Texas and in Nashville and a couple other cities around the country, but there wasn't a whole lot of touring country artists and doing the old school.
It's definitely expanded.
It's blown up.
For sure.
And it's great. I love it because, the rising tide floats all boats. But I've also watched a lot of posturing and sort of flavor of the month, sort of opportunistic aesthetic and musical approaches. And that's fine. It's not to say that, everybody has to be a fringe weirdo like me, but I'm not interested in being absorbed into those circles either. And so in this weird way, I have my own, sort of imposter syndrome that I've grown comfortable with, but also feel like I do inhabit a space completely separate from a lot of this new big, old school air quotes country music scene. And Trash Fire was kind of a song. It's a smirking middle finger to the whole world.
I definitely got that vibe, and that was cool. And you had mentioned, I guess, as far as you describe it, Avant country.
Yep, it is Avant country for sure. Like I said, I don't ever want to be pigeonholed into like, he makes Western swing, he makes old school 50s, he makes 60s shuffles, he does outlaw, it's like, I do a little bit of everything, and that's nice. So.
Great. Well, JP, I'm not going to keep you too much longer. we're gonna get you to play one more song live, if that's cool.
Absolutely, yeah.
Playing at Lonesome Rose?
Oh yeah, he's playing tonight at Lonesome Rose.
That
But
is
we'll
great.
do the plugs after this song, just so
Awesome.
before we say our goodbyes. What do you got for us?
We're gonna play another one from the new record. This is a tune called "Write It All Down." 1, 2, 3, 4. I had a girl called her Memphis Magnolia. She worked at the bar swinging round on a pole. I weren't no gent, she weren't no lady as her good old mule, but my heart caught the Katy. Could have done worse, she could have done better. Write it all down in one last love letter. I rode a train from Arizona to Temple, had me a rider, brown-haired and simple, but she'd hit my teeth when she hit the bottle, running so fast that she done broke the throttle. Now I won't go back, no, not never. Write it all down, one last love letter. There was a highway, she claimed she rode it. Came from the north, at least that's how she told it. She changed her name the day she turned 20. I told her I'd write, she thought that was funny. No, I weren't no catch, just another lover. Write it all down, one last love letter. We drank by the tracks in the dog days of summer. She took off her shirt, told me to come over. Love me so mean, said my whole body aching. She wanted my soul, but my heart weren't for taking. Yeah, I was too young to understand forever. Write it all down in one last love letter. Pretty as a peach, she was sweet in the morning. She'd keep me in bed when the clouds set to pouring. I wanted the fruit, but I just wouldn't shake it. She offered me shade, but I just couldn't take it. Now I stand in the rain, complaining about the weather. Write it all down in one last love letter to you.
KSYM, JP Harris, live in the KSYM studios, doing Write It All Down from his new album, JP Harris is a Trash Fire. He'll be at the Lonesome Rose tonight. JP, what time do you go on?
That's correct. I think the doors are at 8. Show starts at 9 or 9:30, and then we're on about 11 o'clock tonight. So late weekend show. But if anybody's feeling frisky, come on out. I'd be stoked to see some folks. So
cool. And you mentioned on Instagram. Where else can the folks find you if they're interested in getting your stuff?
The easiest, if you like country music, I have the most foolproof and easy to remember website address ever, which I did not know I was scoring for buying it for $2.99 15 or 16 years ago. It is ilovehonkytonk.com. It is quite literally the easiest website to remember.
Yeah.
You don't have to spell my name right, and you just ilovehonkytonk.com. And we got tour dates, and this will be the last of the big touring I'm doing. We've got a few kind of one-offs and special things through the winter, and then we're rounding out through Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas for the rest of this tour. And then heading overseas in April for about 6 weeks. So this is the last chance to see me in Texas, probably until the spring or maybe in the fall sometime. So next year. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming by.
Absolutely.
Loving playing the new record. I got the 2 tracks we kind of talked about queued up here, Trash Fire and Beautiful World, so you can kind of have some context to what we were talking about. If you weren't familiar with the songs before, you can hear them. But yeah, again, thank you, JP, for coming by.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having us.
All right.